Is 4 o'clock, so welcome everyone to the June 2nd meeting of the McLean County Regional Planning Commission. Our attendance, I believe, has been taken, and we have no one here, I believe, for public comment, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. So does anyone have any comments that they would like to make to pull either item A, which is the minutes of the April 7th meeting, item B, the financial reports, or item C, the McLean County Regional staff report? Would anyone like to pull any of those items from the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none, we will move on then to our regular agenda, of which we have no items, actionable items. But we do have a number of items of information and discussion, if you care to ask any questions about. And so the first item is the Regional Housing Initiative review and an update by Lauren Gibson.
Okay, and while Lauren going to the podium, Madam Chair, we also want to recognize our new commissioner, Jennifer Langley, just joined us.
Yes, Jennifer. Oh. Well, welcome, Jennifer. You represent the city of Bloomington, and welcome to your first commission meeting. Would you like to say anything? Give us a little background on yourself.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name's Jennifer Langley. I live in Bloomington. Currently, I work as a registered nurse at Methodist in Peoria. I've been a nurse for about 7 years, working on the COVID unit this year. But I live in Bloomington with my husband and my 3 children and our dog, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, welcome. And actually, let me also take this time to introduce a new person, Tessa Ferraro, to the Planning Commission staff. Would you care to stand so everyone could see you? And if you want, just give us a brief background about, where you came from.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Tessa Ferraro. I received my master's in urban planning from the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I moved here recently, just a couple weeks ago, from Erie, Pennsylvania, where I was working with the city as a zoning officer. So I'm really excited to be a new assistant planner and excited to work with all of you. Thank you.
Well, that's great. And we're not part of the Great Lakes down here. Well, I hope you enjoy the farming community. So also, I wanted to thank Melissa Quinby, who I believe is on the call. And Melissa is leaving her 10-month internship. She's been an ISU fellow, and we want to wish her the best in all of her endeavors to come. So thank you so much, Melissa. Okay, let's hear what Lauren has to say about the Regional Housing Initiative. Lauren?
All right, thank you, Mary. I will share screen here and hopefully can get the right thing pulled up. All right, is that good for everyone?
I can see.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, so it's been 3 years since we formally approved the regional housing initiatives, and that was in spring of 2018. So we thought this would be a good time to just kind of go over what's been happening the past 3 years and kind of where we're going in the future. So just to give you a little bit of background of kind of where we started. So as MCRPC was working with the city and the town to do the comprehensive plannings in 2015 to 2017, we realized that there was a regional approach to housing issues was needed. And, housing didn't stop at Main Street, and the issues kind of crossed boundaries. So that led to the Bloomington Normal Regional Housing Study, which was completed by Ratio in October of 2017. And one of the key recommendations out of that was to create an interjurisdictional group that would be meeting quarterly on housing issues. So that's where the Regional Housing Advisory Committee was born, and the structure was finalized, and we went beyond meeting quarterly. We actually started meeting monthly.
Could you tell us what ratio is? What does that stand for?
Ratio, oh gosh. So that's the consultant.
Okay,
Oh, yeah. How do I minimize that? Just move it over.
Collapse right above this.
This. Okay, cool. Okay, so when we were looking at how to set this up, we realized that obviously MCRPC couldn't tackle everything in the community that was housing. So we kind of took an approach where, you know, it was connected but separate. So obviously homelessness was a big issue, but PATH had already had a big hold in addressing that. So we brought them on to our staff committee, which was one that was born out of MCRPC, as well as the Affordable and Supportive Housing Committee, and the Innovative Housing Solutions Committee, which I'll talk a little bit more on the next slide. Maybe. There we go. So the Housing Staff Committee is basically kind of the overarching, you know, not regulatory, but leading body of this. So membership from the city, town, county, housing authority, you know, all those players that have the direct say in housing. So one of the biggest priorities for this staff committee was to lead the consolidated planning process, which you all heard a lot about. Was a year-long process that we completed in March of 2020. And so we really also kind of want to just start the conversation between a lot of these local agencies and nonprofits that deal with housing, and, you know, really provide that forum for them to come together and collaborate and look at new ways to address housing in our community. So specifically that Affordable and Supportive Housing Committee, focusing on, you know, exactly what it sounds like. So that group has been really instrumental in a lot of the consolidated planning processes and stuff. We also proposed an Innovative Housing Solutions Committee. That was kind of a bit more broad, but we just knew that, you know, there were different housing issues that we wouldn't be able to tackle kind of just as the intergovernmental staff or, you know, their nonprofit. But unfortunately, this one never got off the ground due to a couple reasons. The main one was funding. We didn't have enough funding to do it. And the second one was we didn't really have a sense of how Clinton County Regional Planning Commission and our local housing partners could really drive that agenda. And that's not to say that we're not involved with innovative housing issues. We have been, but we want that to be more of a community-led process. An example of that is with the city of Bloomington. They've been doing a lot with healthy housing and kind of that intersection between housing and the built environment and social determinants of health, and we've been a part of that. So that's kind of an example of one of those processes. So again, the purpose really was to advocate for affordable, supportive, and safe housing for all people in Bloomington Normal, promote different types of housing typologies to kind of match the changing needs of people in our region, facilitate dialogue, support preserving existing housing structures, which we've done a lot of research about, provide support for participating agencies looking to implement new housing strategies, and then gather housing related data and track progress. So kind of that distills all into one broad mission, which is to provide a forum for housing stakeholders to interact on a regular basis, identify collaborative opportunities, and proactively address housing issues in the community. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we've kind of accomplished that mission and objectives over the past 3 years. So the first is with data. The first time we met with the Affordable and Supportive Housing Committee, one of the things that they really wanted to see come out of this process was a centralized hub where they could access all kinds of housing related data for grant applications and for just their general planning. So we created the McLean County Housing Data Dashboard. So that is currently on our website. We have over 70 interactive housing related metrics, including demographics of residents, general data on housing units and costs, affordability, as well as housing options for persons experiencing homelessness. Some of this data goes back to 2015. And so you can kind of scroll through and see how it's changed over the years. We plan on adding more data to that as we see fit and keep an update as new data comes out. So really what's been kind of the crux of what we've been doing is a lot of research. So I'm not going to read everything, and I think you've seen all these documents before. But so we've published 4 different research white papers that we call. Some of them rely heavily on data that's produced by the Department of Housing and Urban Development or the State Housing Development Authority or from Census Bureau ACS data. So we update those yearly now. And Tessa is in the process of updating one of them right now, and they're all published on our website. So that's really helped our partners in creating some of their policies and some of their housing programs. So a couple of other things that we've worked on that are kind of internal to the staff committee, mainly just because they involve data that we don't really want out in the public, such as addresses and demographic information, specific information related to who lives where. 2 of those are the housing choice voucher spatial analysis. I think I've talked about this before. That was a partnership between us and the Bloomington Housing Authority, where they share their housing choice voucher data, and we were able to look at that spatially, and it kind of revealed some locational patterns within, housing choice vouchers in McLean County. It's something that they've been wanting to do for a while, so we were happy that we could incorporate that into our initiatives. The site suitability model, that was something that we worked on for about 2 years before it actually got off the ground. It's still in a beta mode, mainly because I lost Tim and don't have the skills to do as great as he did with it. But I will be updating the data soon. So what that does is, if there's a proposal for a new multifamily affordable housing development, we can look at the specific site it's proposed at based on some different metrics that were identified in some of our plans and look at how that stacks up. Again, just one of the tools that the municipalities can use. So consolidated planning, that has been probably the biggest part of the regional housing initiatives just this far. So it was a year-long planning process for the jointly developed Bloomington and Normal 5-year consolidated plans for the CDBG, which is the Community Development Block Grant Program. So I know I talked to you a lot about this. Some people this may be the first time you're hearing, but we did a very extensive 5-month outreach process between spring and summer of 2019. So we had a survey that we released to the public in 3 different languages, as well as an accompanying stakeholder survey. We did 30 events out in the public, which amounted to about 60 hours of outreach. We had 2 public meetings and 8 focus groups, and we built a CDBG website, which is still on there, still basic information, and you can see all these plans and the resulting documents that are listed here. Then for all that effort, we were awarded the 2020 APA Illinois Public Outreach Award. So this has been a great partnership between us and the city and the town, able to accomplish something that I think we should all be really proud of. And then in the past year, obviously with the coronavirus, things changed and housing was a huge topic. So first we started in about April of 2020 for planning for the disbursement of the CDBG CV funds. So the city and the town got extra allocations of CDBG funds through that first coronavirus stimulus. And I can't remember which month that was in because there's been like 4 by now.
Yeah.
But it was the first one. So we did kind of an outreach process to our local stakeholders saying, hey, what are the issues that your clients are identifying right now and how can we help with them? So housing came up as number 1. And at about the same time, we got connected with United Way of McLean County, who had done a similar survey and were finding the same results. So we were able to partner with them and establish the Housing Assistance Coalition, which I think has been one of the great successes in this community throughout this pandemic. So this was, again, an interjurisdictional effort. We had all of our local government bodies, all of our nonprofits that deal with housing assistance. We had some churches, we had Prairie State Legal Aid on there. So really, the purpose of this committee has been to understand and prepare responses to local housing assistance needs, be that rent, mortgage, and utility bill assistance. So through this committee, we've come up with a uniform application and coordinated entry process. There was about, when we started, I think 6 or 7 different rental assistance programs in McLean County. So we made it as easy as it could be for people to apply that needed it. We also created multiple housing needs analyses and coordinated data collection. So since May 2020, we provided over $3 million locally, and that's rent, mortgage, utility assistance, as well as some other housing related assistance such as first month's, last month's rent. So our MCRPC's role in that, besides being, the co-chair and kind of organizing the meetings and stuff, has really been on a focus on data. So data collection every month. We have our partners report what they've done, and analysis, as well as research and updates on federal bills and statutes, because as we all know, there's a lot coming down the pipeline related to housing. So we want to make sure that all of our nonprofit and government partners who are overworked as it is have access to that information. So really, that's kind of the brief overview of what we've done these past years. Here's a little timeline. I'll just hit some highlights. So October 2017 is when we completed the regional housing study. The CDBG plan really started in December 18 when we adopted the citizen participation plan. We, in winter of 2018 and 2019, we really focused on that research and data portion. Let's see. So like I said, March 2020 was when the Bloomington Normal Consolidated Plans were adopted. And then basically a week or 2 after that, we started planning for the CDBG CV funds, and then transitioned into Housing Assistance Coalition. And so this spring, what we've done is take a look at our structure document, and I think you have that in your packet as well, and just kind of look at, okay, when we established this 3 years ago, we had visions of how it was going to look like. Do we still agree with that? Do we want to make any changes? So really the biggest change was changing that Innovative Housing Solutions Committee from MCRPC led to community led, which I think will really reflect kind of on the ground what's been happening. Just a couple of grammatical changes, but that's kind of the highlight of that. And that's it. Let's see. This one. There we go. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I have a question. Can we tell on our website how the use is of the information about housing?
Yeah, we can. I haven't looked at it in a while. I would say the housing data dashboard has probably been the number one. And I think our outreach analyses that we did for the consolidated plans were pretty up there too.
Okay, that's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Do the developers use the tool that you?
So it's an internal tool for basically the city planners, town planners, and any policy staff. We do plan on hopefully within the next few months releasing more of a public facing one that'll show the locations of the existing affordable housing developments in Bloomington Normal, when their subsidies expire, how many units they have, things like that.
So if a developer wants to build a multi-family income assisted building, are these tools used by this 2 cities then to give them approval to go ahead with these projects?
So the city and the town do use them as a tool to evaluate the projects. It's not an end all be all. Kind of the intent was to just be one tool in the toolbox of things that they would use to evaluate a proposal like that.
If I may add too, from time to time, like Lauren would reach out to some of the nonprofit developers, if you will, housing, and then especially when they try to apply for the tax credit, housing, low income, through the state programs or federal. And so we have conversations with those developers and then we trying to, and so from time to time, if we know there's some other ones, like recently, it wasn't like from Springfield, Illinois, there's a developer doing something like in this area. And I would not be surprised if they have done their homework. Usually they have to, they should, and look at whatever data is available. But we don't know, we cannot like track who view our data. But I'm sure they put the performer together and use a lot of information.
Yeah, I think a lot of times I've had developers contact me, just kind of to want to know about some of the data that we have. And I know a lot of times if someone is looking to do a development, they contact the housing authority, which has been a great partner in this. And Jeremy Hayes always sends them over to me too. So it's worked out pretty well.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yep.
Did Central Community Action play much of a role in this?
Yeah, they're on our Affordable and Supportive Housing Committee. They actually helped out a ton in our consolidated planning process. They're also part of the Housing Assistance Coalition.
It's just it's a curiosity interest because I worked there for 10 years.
Yeah. MCCA has been a great partner.
And is the NeighborWorks or the Neighborhood Reinvestment Corporation involved at all?
Oh.
Are we still a NeighborWorks organization?
Yeah, they're still a NeighborWorks organization. I think a lot of their home building activity was with the Attorney General settlement, and I think those dollars ran out. But yes, they're still very much involved. They do a lot of like housing counseling, especially for first-time home buyers and stuff. And we provide them with information about, hey, the state's running this down payment assistance program right now. Here's something you should share with your clients.
Great, thanks, Laura.
Lauren, do you have any sense of the impact this has had on homelessness in our community?
So homelessness is kind of that separate but related part of this. I do attend all the continuum of care meetings, so PAC does a great job.
Yeah.
I know since we started, which probably has absolutely nothing to do with this, but they did end veterans homelessness in McLean County. That was HUD, I think, gave a ruling. That was probably 2 years ago. So I don't know what the status is right now.
You mean a grant for veterans they ended or what?
No, they just designated that McLean County
Oh,
has.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've worked with them very closely over the past year with kind of all this coronavirus related things, sharing information about grants that are available. We're actually focusing our next Housing Assistance Coalition meeting on kind of the impending rollback of the eviction moratorium and how we can, as a community, stave off that potential wave of homelessness that could be coming.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
All right.
Okay. Item B is the draft state fiscal year 2022 United Work Program.
So I'll call on Ray and Jennifer.
Yeah,
to give that.
yeah, sure, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, if Jen's getting up to the podium, ready for a little PowerPoint presentation. Items B and C kind of related in the sense that we have to respond to IDOT and we have to submit information and documents to them. So we have a presentation with those B and C kind of together, but then just give you an idea on item number B is which you're familiar with because we did it last year, was the Unified Work Program, except this is a new fiscal year. And so it's time for us to propose something to IDOT. The UWP is one document that does not need the commission's approval, but needs the approval of the Transportation Policy Committee, which is because our role as an MPO, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and that policy committee is chaired by Madam Chair of the Planning Commission. And but as far as IDOT is concerned, that's all they need is the approval by the committee. But from staff, we would like to hear your feedback, if any, because we put a draft together budget every year around this time of the year. And in fact, we're required to submit a draft earlier, but then we're waiting for IDOT to review. but this is the opportunity to, like, if you have any comments or whatnot, but we've been doing this like, many years.
Yes.
And also item C, just want to mention, it's the TIP program. It stands for Transportation Improvement Program. Our improvement program, we call it TIP. And every year we do have this like annual program, but then also every 5 years we have a 5-year program. It is all required, by the government, the state, federal, and so we have to prepare this kind of 5-year planning for any improvements, for the roads, infrastructures, and put this together. And then every year we'll do an annual program, but then also during that year there could be some amendments, as Chair recall. Sometimes we have amendments to certain projects, and those from that this overall program. So Dan has some slides to give you those 2 items, and we have sent the PDF and also the links, and we trust that you all got a chance to review those documents ahead of time. So this slide just provide kind of a summary and highlights.
Okay. Now that we've fought our way through the various technologies here, as Ray mentioned, we're going to be covering 2 documents this afternoon, starting with the Unified Work Program, or as we know it affectionately, the UWP. This covers the IDOT fiscal year, which begins on July 1st and runs through next June, and each year, obviously, continuing that. As Ray mentioned, it's one of our federally required documents as a metropolitan planning organization. So we do this every year. And also, as Ray mentioned, it's approved eventually by the Transportation Policy Committee, which is currently chaired by Mary Cramp as our commission chairperson. And that will happen at the end of June. I'll note here that the Unified Work Program is the first of 2 annual budget documents that we now undertake. The second one being the Overall Work Program, which we do as part of the county's budget process. It includes, actually, the thing that it mostly includes that's not in the UWP is all of Lauren's work, because that is not funded through IDOT. So this is concentrated, UWP is concentrated on the IDOT funded items in our Overall Work Program, and the remainder of it is covered in our Overall Work Program, which we will work through with the county a little bit later on. So as I said, focuses on our IDOT funded work, which is really U.S. Department of Transportation funding that flows through IDOT for us to do metropolitan transportation planning as it's laid out by the federal government. In our case, that means our general administration, which covers administrative costs for a lot of areas of our program, comprehensive planning and technical assistance, transportation planning and technical assistance, data gathering technology and smart cities. A lot of this, backwards. Well, I'll just go with it. A lot of this has to do with things that we do through other organizations. And then we have, there is a sort of education and outreach process that we do in our program, which sometimes varies. It can be quite involved, or it can be fairly basic. And of course, the data gathering technology and smart cities I was mentioning too, that really gets now to our Innovation Alliance as well, which we'll be talking a little bit later on the 5G thing. This is the basis for our, what the rubric from USDOT is the 3C process, which is continuing, cooperative, and comprehensive metropolitan planning, which is what we as an MPR are supposed to do. And it also forms the basis of our annual agreement with IDOT to carry out that planning effort. And the contract requirements in the document that derives from our UWP then become the basis for performance measures against which we are judged, basically, as we work through the year and carry out these tasks. So moving on from that, the accounts from IDOT, the funding that we receive plus a local match breaks out into this pie chart, basically. And you see, again, the same work elements down below with the budgeted amounts. The overall budget for this year's Metropolitan Planning Program is $626,383. And the pie chart shows you that 60% of that is coming from federal funding from both the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. with an additional amount coming from the state's metropolitan transportation planning process. So that's 15%, almost $95,000. The 17% in the lower right is actually our contribution through regional service agreements between regional planning and 3 large local governments. And then finally, we've added in a little incentive here with $22,500 from MCRPC reserve amounts and $25,000 from a process we have with Connect Transit to do to support their efforts and do planning on their behalf. And we keep hoping that as soon as they have a new general manager, we'll get back to being able to do that. So again, with the 5 work elements, that was the previous slide. Interesting. So that's basically a quick overview of the UWP. As I said, it's something that we do annually, and it's the basis for the overall work program that we do later on in dealing with the county. So if anyone has questions, I'd be happy to answer them now. If you prefer to wait until the end, we can do that too. Anybody?
Well, just real quickly, the money we're allocating for Connect Transit, that's just with the hope that they get a new manager and they start a slightly different direction at this point.
It's actually the other way around. They're allocating it to us.
Oh, okay.
So Connect, we have a 3-year agreement with Connect that actually began last year. Of course, the coronavirus problem put the kibosh on a lot of what we might have done, plus which the transition in their general manager, you know, they had 3 people basically in less than a year. So we're hoping that they're back on track quite soon. The idea is that, again, we're assisting them with some of their planning efforts. Excuse me.
Mhm.
And, you know, partly that's the fulfillment of the short-term plan we did for them a couple of years ago. And then moving on from that, they have a lot of initiatives underway, and they have a series of recommendations coming from put together about 18 months ago. And as a result, there's a lot waiting for them to get going on, and we're looking forward to helping them with that. Anybody else? Let me stop sharing the screen because there's nothing. Well, no, hang on. I'll come back to it. Anything else? Questions or curiosity?
Nope.
Gotcha. All right. Right back to sharing the screen then. So moving on to the Transportation Improvement Program. So for some reason, it's decided to be funky with me. All right. As we've already explained, Transportation Improvement Program is a 5-year summary, essentially, of anticipated projects being carried out on our streets and roads, trails, bike paths, you name it. Also the transit system. It's also required as part of our MPO process. We do this annually, but it covers a 5-year period. The map you see sort of on the right here is indicative of the area we're covering. We're currently doing so the next fiscal year is FY22 at the state level, starting in July. We're going through 26. What usually happens is that the first year is packed full of things that are going to happen fairly soon. By the time you get to year 5, it gets to be a little more speculative. The one sort of defining condition of projects that are addressed in this document is that they must be funded. There must be identified funding to carry them out from whatever source. Usually it's multiple sources. And that is the predicate for being listed in the Transportation Improvement Program and having your project be eligible to receive all of that funding. There's another category of project that is used sometimes, quite a lot in fact, called the illustrative project. These are projects that don't have confirmed funding. We go ahead and list them because they do eventually tend to get funded in some fashion when they go forward. A lot of the big things we've done in the last, say, 5 years were once illustrative projects that weren't ready to go yet. So when you look at the document as a whole, you'll see a long list of projects, and some of them are sort of highlighted in a kind of orangey salmon color. And those are the illustrative projects for which there is not yet funding, but which there might be at some point in the future. So covered this already. This is our metropolitan planning area. This is the area over which we as the MPO have some sort of, not authority exactly, but influence. So this sort of blue model area with a little extension out here, it covers it. So it includes Towanda and Downs, as well as obviously Bloomington and Normal. It goes pretty far to the east. That's the Grove subdivision out here. And then, of course, this is West Route 9, where there's some concentrated residential development, which has brought it into our orbit here. Again, it's a 5-year summary of the programmed projects, which is to say the ones that are funded, that are in the state's program, that are ready to go. The planned projects are much more the illustrated ones. We can include them, but we have to acknowledge that they don't have the funding they necessarily need or expect to need. So programmed is, yes, it's going to happen, we hope. And illustrative is, we hope it's going to happen. We think we have an idea of where the money can come from and what the project should look like, but we're not quite there yet. However, we want everyone to be aware that this is a possibility in the hopes that somebody will turn up with the cash. So obviously this includes roads, pedestrian and bicycle facilities, trails, things like Route 66 are included here. Transit services and facilities, both for Connect Transit as the urban public transit provider, and also for Showbus as the rural public transit provider, which is based here in McLean County and is supported by the McLean County government as the grantee for the funds that Showbus uses to operate. The county in turn has agreements with other surrounding counties in the Showbus service area and essentially manages the Showbus grant process on their behalf. For the most part, these are smaller counties with very small staffs, and they simply don't have the capacity to handle the grant management process or the funding, and they get the advantage of Showbus through their relationship with McLean County. We also have some educational programs, things like my watch telling me I'm talking too fast. I'm very helpful at it. So things like Safe Routes to School, which is a federally based program, which is used to provide some infrastructure. You can do that with Safe Routes to School, but you could also do educational programs, training for school kids on how to bike safely. The Friends of the Trail has received a Safe Routes to School grant, which I'm looking forward to getting started on now that things are opening up and they're going to have access to school kids and being able to work with them. So that's a good thing, and it's going to be part of our larger outreach and something I'll mention later, which is Vision Zero and Go Safe. Some features of our tip: it's actually technically only required to include projects that include federal funding and support. So that's true of a number of projects in our tip, but we also include local projects that don't include federal funding, in part because of what's shown in this pie chart. This is our 5-year program funding, $215 million. It's a lot of money. And as you can see, it's a slight edge on the local contributions for the overall total, which we wouldn't know if we hadn't included all of those locally funded projects. Most of this comes from local motor fuel tax and other sources. And I think it's important for people to see that, we're not just sitting back and waiting for the federal dollars to roll in. Local governments are working very hard to make sure that they use their resources as broadly as possible. And that's where that nearly $100 million over 5 years comes from. It's a more accurate view of how the costs are absorbed and who provides for all of the changes that we see around the community. And the other thing that's a little unusual, although I think IDOT is making this more routine, is that although we have our metropolitan plan area, and for the most part, that's the control for what goes into our document, both IDOT and McLean County have asked us on occasion to include projects that are significant for some reason. IDOT is particularly fond of doing that. And for McLean County, any project of theirs which in any way touches our metropolitan planning area, even if it only comes in by 100 feet, we include so that we can see, the county's investment, and they have access to types of funding, both at the federal, state, and local levels, obviously, that are not available to the urban area local governments. So we can then see what they're doing with that funding and how it benefits or impacts on the urbanized area and the metropolitan planning area. And as you see, the state is tossing a little contribution here. One of the things that happens, this includes all of the IDOT projects for the area. What IDOT does is bring in an awful lot of federal dollars. Most of their projects, and they have usually 4 or 5 in a given year, are heavily funded by federal dollars coming directly to the state, and then they match those dollars usually about 10 to 20%, depends on the project. So a lot of what you see here in that almost $100 million is really because the state is using federal dollars to do projects here, mostly in the urbanized area and a little bit around McLean County. We are currently within a 30-day public review period, which is required, which we do every year. That started last week. And during that, we will have a technical committee meeting on the 18th of June, which will include a public hearing about this document. And we will be putting out, I think tomorrow, an announcement on our website, plus an ad in the paper to promote that public hearing so people know that it's available. Obviously, we'll have a virtual aspect to that so people can comment without having to show up. And then finally, the policy committee will meet on the 25th of June, and we hope for final approval of this document, which will then be submitted to IDOT. And there's a resolution essentially that is part of the document that is for the policy committee to approve. And then there's a second document which is part of our planning process approval from IDOT that they sign off on and Ray signs off on. So we do this every year. And it's always interesting to see what comes out of the woodwork in terms of projects available. Any questions about that?
I'm curious if you could give us an idea of an illustrative project that has carried over, a significant illustrative project. It was Hamilton Road.
Once upon a time, way back when dinosaurs roamed in McLean County, absolutely it was.
Okay.
Hamilton Road is in pieces, has been in the transportation improvement program expecting to be carried out since I started working here and before. This has gone on for 25 years. And things have changed over that time period. So some of the elements of the project have changed. But initially it was a fight to find the appropriate funding and to define the segments of the road that would be managed. We're in the last segment at this point, which is the final chunk that will sort of curve up, actually will curve up this way from your perspective, and cross the railroad, which is where the hitch comes in, and finally connect Hamilton Road east to west all across the southern edge of Bloomington. Negotiating with the railroads takes time. This is Norfolk Southern this time around. For normally, it's always Union Pacific. And they think they're finally at the stage where they have everything sequenced so they can go ahead and do the relocation of the railroad and make it so that the railroad crossing is 90 degrees because anything else is incredibly unsafe. So this means rearranging some of the other track that forms a kind of holding area for some of the trains. It's been a very long involved process, and that was once upon a time thought it was going to be almost impossible to do. But here we are. Money's pretty much lined up. The city is still looking for a handful of potential additional funding sources so that they can not spend all of their motor fuel tax on this. But they're really looking forward to getting this over with so that the road can function the way it's supposed to, so that it's safe for people crossing that grade level crossing from the railroad. And we'll see if it happens. It's sort of happens soon. And the city, in sort of in anticipation of that, has put forward other illustrative projects that are not yet funded, but will be, that have to do with taking the trail, Constitution Trail, further down into that area, so that it can be used as an access point to this new completed arterial that again goes all across the southern edge of Bloomington. It will be, I think, interesting to watch how things change once that's complete and people really can use it the way it's always been intended.
Yeah, if I may add to that project, the Hamilton Road project's been identified and presented to the federal officials and the state officials a few months ago as part of the Economic Development Council's their one voice trip, but except this year was virtual. And to the elected officials, congressmen, senators, and trying to pitch for additional funding to complete that project. But that's one of the three projects identified as very regional significant.
Okay. Does anyone on the Zoom call have any questions?
Hey, yeah, this is Bart Bittner. I had a question. Could you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. How does, and not necessarily specifically the Hamilton Road portion, but just in general, as we talk about these countywide plans that reach out into more than just Bloomington normal, how does the east side bypass corridor impact or play into that role? I mean, can we make plans and go into areas that are involved in that corridor, or are we pretty much shut down or any development until the IDOT or somebody releases that?
Actually, no, it's, at this point, we are in a sort of holding pattern, but temporarily. We have been engaged for the last 4 years or so, probably heading into the 5th, of monitoring locations around the community, obviously within the corridor area that was defined during the East Side Highway study, but also elsewhere in Bloomington Normal, to determine if a need has emerged to proceed with that project. It has not. And one of the impacts of first the recession, back in the early 20-teens, and then obviously more recent events has been that our projections for the rate of growth, and particularly for residential growth in Bloomington Normal, I won't say they fell off a cliff, but they certainly were pulled away back from the somewhat more enthusiastic expectations of the 1990s and the early 2000s. And one of the things that we talked about in the final stages of the East Side Highway study was how radically we'd had to change our expectations for population growth and therefore the need for that highway. Based on the estimates at the time that the study was concluded, that was looking like perhaps $500 million in investment, and it simply can't be justified by the current expectations of growth, not just in the short term, but also in the longer term. There have been changes on the part of both Bloomington and Normal in how they view expansion and annexation and how they decide as to whether or not it is practicable and economically feasible to do essentially territorial additions. And all of that has pretty much led to a situation now in which it would take a really major event, like an enormous new employer coming to town in order to resurrect the idea of that highway. As you may remember, Bart, there was not a reservation of that corridor made at the time because it wasn't possible to determine who would have to do it. Ordinarily, as with the former Mitsubishi motorway, it was a county process. Because that project would have required the state to essentially take over, it was an expectation that it would be a state reservation of that corridor area, and the state did not want to pursue that. So I wouldn't worry too much about the East Side Highway because we've pretty much grown out of or grown back from the need to proceed with something that vast and are concentrating more on sustainable development and also preserving our system capacity as it is now so that it's usable and available for the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was curious because I think what I was told at the time, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that IDOT really holds that corridor until it's released. And maybe I'm wrong on that. You could tell me otherwise. But if the county or municipalities or regional planning, or we came up with some plan to do some development or some regional planning in that area, how impeded are we, or what's the process to get released? Because I'll admit I've got a conflict of interest. I'm a landowner in that corridor, and as the landowner in that corridor, kind of feel like I'm being held hostage. We're in that corridor. We've really never been released from it, and we don't totally know what that means, but no one will say, hey, it's released, it's over. Is that something we as a community have to initiate with IDOT, or will IDOT release that at some point in time, or how does that work?
My recollection, and I too may not have got this totally clear, but I spent a lot of time with this project, so I spent a lot of time on the details as well. IDOT did not feel it was in a position to proceed with an actual corridor reservation or protection in the same way that the county had done with Mitsubishi Motorway. That's a question we can ask them. And I think at this juncture, it's probably time to ask them that question, to say, look, based on everything we know now, a lot of the assumptions that went into the sort of underlying premise of the East Side Highway study are not panning out. We're not going to see the kind of development that we expected to see as of 2005. And that will probably prompt some action from probably the Illinois Department of Transportation, at least some sort of communication as to how they view this. Again, this was never a project that was going to be possible for the local governments, given the sheer size of it. And IDOT was not making a commitment at that point. They never went to the feds and said, please give us $250 million. So it's that being the case, I think we're probably past the point in which it's reasonable to ask those questions and to see if we can get some definitive answers so that all of you who have property in that area, and believe me, we were very aware of that, are in a position to say that this particular issue is probably behind us, and you are free to move on with whatever plans you want to make. I can't make that promise because I'm just a bureaucrat. But on the other hand, I think that's something the state can probably address at this point. We have no evidence to suggest that growth is going to reach a point where, once again, that highway is a feasible proposition. And again, what we've said in the comprehensive plans for both Bloomington and Normal, and we'll probably be repeating in the transportation plan we'll be starting any minute now, and it will be culminating next year, is that because of the decisions that have been made by the local governments, we think it's unlikely that there will be development out in the area where the East Side Highway might have been, and that we've turned into a much more compact and careful mode of development, including the building of new roads. And this would not be consistent with, again, the building of the East Side Highway.
Okay, thank you very
Even
much.
if we were going to go ahead, it would be completely new. We'd have to pretty much start from zero,
Right.
because it's been several years. We'll ask the question, and then we'll see what kind of response we can get, and maybe that's something we can sort of communicate to everyone when we have an answer.
Okay, well, thank you. And I may not be the appropriate commissioner to pose that question. And if that's the case, I can acquiesce because I'm obviously have a conflict of interest on it. But it's something that since I've been on the commission and since people found out I was on the commission, I've had a lot of people in our area ask me that question. So yeah, that would be something that would sure be of value to people in that area. And whether I can be the one that helps ask that question or not, I will back off from that and let someone that knows more than I do, let me know if it's a conflict of interest for me to be involved or not.
I think that with Ray's concurrence, we can look into an approach to IDOT, maybe a nice letter saying, please clarify where you are on this. And if you have any expectations, here's where we are in terms of our more recent planning efforts.
Okay, thank you very much for your time on that. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, I had a question about the East Side, where we were with the East Side Highway. Anyway, so if you feel that Bart has a conflict of interest, I do not own land out there. I have no property. The university doesn't have any interest at all in it as well. So I'd be happy to be the commissioner too that would ask that question.
I'm not even sure who decides what constitutes a conflict of interest for the commissioners, although obviously Bart's example is a reasonable one.
Yeah.
However you all decide you want to proceed, obviously we can go in that direction and make this inquiry. So we have
I think it's a valid question. I've done some other kind of long range, like transportation type planning project out in the rural farmland area, like many square mile area type, and then the farmers or the property owners had a similar concern. What should they do with their current properties, right? Do they hold on to it? Should they sell it if the developer approaching them? So I think it's a valid question. We'll see, who at the IDOT hierarchy, that we can pose a question. I think it's a valid question.
Yeah, and we're not going to get any, I would assume we're not going to get any pushback from either Bloomington or Normal about that issue, it would seem.
one of the key outcomes of the two municipal comprehensive plans, first Bloomington's and then Normal's, starting in 2013 and moving forward into, I think 2017 was when Normal adopted their plan, is that they both redefined the notion of growth areas.
Yeah.
And basically it was a question of staying contiguous to the existing community, staying within the reach of utilities and other services so that all didn't have to be added in, including streets to some extent, and then holding off on any further expansion unless Microsoft came to town or some other massive economic change happened that would justify a huge new expansion. And that hasn't happened. I haven't heard from Bill Gates, but I don't think it's going to happen. And that's kind of the premise of the two plans that were adopted by Bloomington and Normal. And it makes an enormous difference with respect to the East Side. It's a totally different creature now in planning terms. So I don't anticipate either of them saying, oh yeah, let's spend $500 million on something we probably will never need.
Right.
So I think it's probably time to move on to the next topic. That was very interesting though. So the pavement surface evaluation, PASER, if you could.
Sure, absolutely. And I'll keep this quick. We don't have
Okay.
slides for this.
All right.
The chairperson, Cram, has earlier this afternoon executed for us IDOT's extended project deadline for the Pacer project out until next year instead of like a month ago. So we're very glad about that because it meant that the grant can be used in full and will be. There is a draft agreement between regional planning and the selected consultant for this to arrange to pass through the funds from the grant. We did something very similar for the town of Normal's by competitive plan. That's currently under review by the town. County legal staff will look at it to make sure that we haven't done anything silly. And the consultant will determine if they're willing to agree to it. That should not be a problem. This is a very basic, here's where the money comes from and how you'll get it kind of agreement. And we hope that it will be ready for consideration for approval by the commission at the July meeting, assuming there is a July meeting, soon, in other words. And that sets terms, as I said, for the pass-through of these state planning and research grants, which are actually federal dollars, to the consultant through us. It's a little awkward, but that's how it's set up. They'll begin work, or they can begin work once that agreement is fully executed. So we know how the money flows. And it's expected to be done by the end of December of this year. So they're going to go through a couple of stages of studying the streets, recording things, doing analysis, and training the town of Baltimore using some analytic software that they are going to obtain. And that will be that. And we'll finally have this information to add to similar information from Bloomington and the county. So we have one big pavement, concept for the entire area, which is important because that it helps us come up with a reasonable estimate of what needs to be dealt with first, rather than siloing it between each local government. We can say, oh, here's a location where both the city and the town have issue on a street that they both manage, and here's how we can approach it, rather than having it trying to do it individually and be up in the middle of whatever.
Right. We've even had the news cover parts of this story.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's move on to Vision Zero.
Yeah.
And I believe Jennifer is going to enlighten us on this too.
Ray, do you want to break it on this?
Yeah, if her breaking in and I'll say a few things and then
Okay.
you can Jen can add on. Yeah, since your approval or adoption of the plan in early April, so we have had like discussion at the intergovernmental group meeting with the local government staff and to see what the implementation structure should be and the approach that should be taken. And then last week, as a matter of fact, Jen and I gave a presentation about the project to the Connect Transit Board, just to get them engaged and be aware of this project. And because safety, as this project is for, is a lot of connection with the public transit and people using transit. And in fact, the number of people, more people who take the transit, it would decrease the number of accidents on the road because less people will be driving. I mean, that's the idea. So we gave a presentation to the trustee board last week. And also we keep exploring different funding and grant opportunities because implementation, we know is important, just even on the federal or the state level, there might be some foundations. And so we will be, keep our eyes open to those. It's safe routes to school with the Friends of the Constitution Trail. Jane's going to reach out to them because there's some grants and some programs related to, for people to go to school safely. Also outreach with universities, colleges, high schools went back to school. So that's how to get the young adults and the kids, to engage, to know public safety, transportation safety. And we also plan to have, we kind of in the contemplating stage, is to have a joint session with the elected officials from the county, the city, and town. Just more informational session, because they may, even though we apprise them and invite them to different sessions, they, not all of them attended. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to have a joint session, cover educational, informational for this big group with all the board members, county board, and city councils and council. Just kind of, we're exploring that and just see where it's good times, how to coordinate when so many people like involved. So that's that. And then Jane's working on a few more things. So you want to
Right.
mention those?
Although we're now all over the GoSafe logo and identity and sort of branding for this project. And it's incredibly engaging, so we think it's going to work really well. But we haven't forgotten Vision Zero. So I'm in the process of putting together an application or sort of a request for recognition to the Vision Zero network, which is the kind of guiding body for that whole process, and submitting our plan to them and asking for recognition. And eventually, at least as a Vision Zero city, we go on a nice map, and we would be the only one outside of Chicago in the state that has this. So we're working on that. I'm going to get some help from local staff to get some of the information pulled together. And there are a couple of other little attachments to that. So that's in process. I'm so excited about GoSafe as an identity, as a thing, that I'm actually preparing an application for an Illinois state trademark. I have to say state trademarks. I used to do this for a living. So state trademarks are kind of worth what they cost, which is about $10. But it's worth it as a gesture that, you know, we're really serious about this and we want to protect it. I would not like to see, after all the trouble that's been gone through, all the work that's been done, to see this new concept get sort of diluted out from under us. So that's
GoSafe, you mean?
GoSafe, yes, right, exactly. And then I'm also looking at the cost of doing a federal trademark application, which, unlike the state version, has teeth. And therefore, if we find it being used by someone for approve it, and I think this would be a county review. I'm not sure how that works, and we're talking to the county legal department as well. We have some stats with which to protect it if we need to. One more thing, because we're ending the Vision Zero project that was funded, I'm putting together all the materials we have to submit to the state to show them what we've done. And there's a lot to work with, and I think they're going to be excited about where we can go with this, as we are, because there's so much potential in this throughout the community at every level, and with all kinds of partnerships that can be put into place to really make this a major campaign for real safety on a part of everybody. I'm looking forward to it. I got to see lots of activity.
Okay.
All right.
Questions?
Any questions about GoSafe? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to the item F, the Bloomington Normal Wireless Infrastructure, 5G, basically, project update. Right.
Yeah, thank you. Basically 5G, as you have been hearing about it on the presentations in the past. So the latest or the update is that the consultants, they have completed the outreach to city and town staff and also to the universities, you know, for the needs in terms of 5G and the wireless infrastructure networks. So that's what they have completed. They still also try to get some information from the Heartland Community College. They were invited but did not participate, so they try to reach out to them as well. But they have connect with ISU and IWU. In June this month, they will be completing the needs assessment, and that they will be meeting with the service providers such as like Comcast and MetroNet, and with special focus on the affordable service, you know, for the community. And then they keep working on the draft reports that eventually has to be put together, but they're in the process of doing that. They have started the entire project for this service, supposed to be completed by the fall of this year. So they're moving on that. So questions, comments?
Okay. Any questions? Okay, hearing none. That's it. Item G is that which may arise. Does anyone have anything they would like to bring up before we move on to close the meeting? Okay, hearing none, I want to be sure and thank Jennifer, because that was a very interesting presentation.
And you stepped down before I had a chance
So
to
thank you. So anyway, we're going to adjourn. And what is the time now?
5:05.
5:05. Thank you all for attending, and we'll see you in July. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Oh,
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Have a good night.
I'm sorry, we have to have a vote too. So is there a motion?
So
Move.
Okay.
Sell second.
All in favor? All in favor. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.